Okay, so I'm going to read through the Malphite changes that I suggested on the date seen here. The goal here is to cover Malphite's intense weaknesses by taking a bit from his strengths. Okay, so let's try not to hate on the idea. I think it's really good, and I think that Riot should do this change, because Malphite, I feel, is in a really bad spot at the moment. So I look at his R rework. So one of the things that I think is really bad about Malphite is that if you get hit by his ultimate, there's zero counterplay. You can't cleanse, you're knocked out for 1.5 seconds, and if the Malphite's good, you know, he's going to ult you in a spot where his team can follow up on the knockup, and you're probably going to die before you hit the ground. So, if you're trying to face check a Baron, and you can't see in the brush, you're just going to, Malphite's going to ult you from Fog of War, and it's going to be impossible to react in time with Flash. You're going to be knocked out for 1.5 seconds, and you're going to die. So this is an area where Malphite is incredibly strong and is the absolute best champion in the game. Is when you have vision control, and the enemy team has to face check into a brush. Malphite can literally destroy you. It's impossible to react with Flash when you don't see Malphite until he's already halfway through the range of his ultimate, or he's ulting you from close range. It makes it impossible to Flash. So if he's in Fog of War, and he ults you, you know, and you're just going to get knocked up and die, impossible to have any counterplay whatsoever. Impossible, right? So you look at what is similar. You know, Morgana Binding from Fog of War, pretty long, you can cleanse Morgana Binding, right? Just cleanse it. Just use Hourglass to stop the Malphite ult, right? Zhonya's, right? So as we look further into this, what we see is that if I have a Banshee's Veil or a Zhonya's Hourglass, Malphite is worthless. He's terrible, because I just Banshee's the Malphite ult, and he does nothing to me. I Zhonya's the Malphite ult, and he does nothing to me. His entire ultimate is just to get a Zhonya's, which a lot of people could see is pretty bad. Some situations, you know, it's like, oh, he had to Zhonya's, and now right when he comes out, we can just kill him, and maybe it's not terrible, but in general, Malphite ultimate has intense upside that is bigger than any champion in the entire game. Okay, Malphite ultimate has intense downside, right, that is probably worse downside than just about any champion in the game. Okay, so you're looking at this, you say, let's Hourglass. The Syndra ult, cool. Syndra ult did no damage, but she's not in melee range, so she didn't get punished that hard, right? Okay, we're going to Zhonya's the Rumble ult. Okay, Rumble ult did nothing. Okay, Rumble is not in melee range. He ulted you from far away, and he didn't really get punished by you using Zhonya's, because the Zhonya's cooldown and the ultimate cooldown are similar, so it's kind of an even trade, right? So Malphite, when he ults in and uses Zhonya's, he is stuck in melee range of your entire team, and he's going to get wrecked. He's going to get completely wrecked. Now, if you're a 70-minute Malphite with 400 armor and 4,000 hit points, it doesn't matter that much that you're in melee range of the enemy, necessarily. Okay, if you are a 9-minute Malphite, you know, if you are, let's say somebody goes Zhonya's first item before their mythic. You know, technically the mythic bonus doesn't come in until you get your second item anyway, so you don't lose that much by going Zhonya's first. The mythic is still preferable, but okay, well, let's just say, you know, you're playing a game as Malphite, and the enemy team is 2 items in. The enemy mid laner is 2 items in, and he happens to have an Hourglass, and the AD carry has Stopwatch, right? So Malphite at this point probably has his tank mythic, and maybe Ninja Tabby, and maybe a Giant's Belt, because top lane Malphite is generally denied CS very hard. So when the AD carry and mid have 2 full items, Malphite has tank mythic, boots, and maybe a Giant's Belt at best. That's still pretty, for Malphite, that's a pretty good place to be in. When the AD carry mid have finished 2 items, if Malphite's kind of 1.5 items, or 1 1/3 items, that's actually not a bad place to be in. Malphite usually gets denied CS a lot. So let's say you're a Malphite with 1 1/3 items, and you ultimate into the enemy team, and you try to knock up the mid laner, so your team can like one-shot the Akali, right? And now Akali presses Hourglass, and Malphite is in the middle of 4 people. And he's now, 600, 700 range away from his team. And he didn't get the knockup, so his team has, the Akali is in Hourglass, his team is not in range to attack anyone. But all 4 of the enemies are in range to attack Malphite, so Malphite gets wrecked. And it's really bad. It looks really, really bad, and Malphite looks completely worthless and terrible pretty much in all of these situations. Okay? Now, the upside of Malphite is if they have to face check, they don't have vision, he can ult them before they have time to Hourglass. If his team has a lead and he has vision control, he can ult from Fog of War. Okay, this is huge upside. This is really... So Malphite is like, the ceiling has been blown off of the house. The roof is completely blown off of the house. Okay, but the basement is like... you got like 3 stories of basement. So that's kind of what I look at when I see Malphite. So that's what I don't like about him. Because a good game, you're perfect. And you carry the whole game. And you look like, amazing. And it's super fun. In a bad game, it's not fun at all. It's terrible. You can't do anything. You feel completely worthless. Okay, they're 100% of the time they're flashing your ult. 100% of the time they're using Zhonya's Hourglass to dodge your ult. 100% of the time Tahm Kench scoops the AD carry when you try to ult him. It just feels really bad. You feel worthless, and you feel like you're not accomplishing anything. And on top of that, your lane phase is absolute hell. So you have this horrible lane phase that's not fun at all, and the other team can completely counter everything that you're doing with just Hourglass, Stopwatch, or Flash. So Malphite feels really bad to play. He feels really bad to play. And I think he feels even worse to play for players who understand the game really well, and they already know how the game's going to go when they queue up, which is they're going to get smashed in lane. The other team's going to build, as soon as Malphite's picked, they're going double AP. And they're going double Zhonya's. Right? And it's like, who can I actually engage on? Because, the AD carry is way out of range, and if I try to ultimate max range, he's just going to, he's going to jump away as Ezreal, or Tristana's going to flash, or something like this. Feels really bad. Feels really bad. So here's what I did. Here's what I want to do. The ultimate, right now in Malphite's kit, his ultimate makes him super good, and the rest of his kit is kind of bad. So he's super ultimate focused. That's why his laning phase is garbage. But he has this massive upside. So why don't we just lower the upside of Malphite, and then even out his weaknesses. Now Malphite's actually a playable champion, and you're not changing the core of what Malphite is supposed to do. Okay. So here's what I want to do. I want to rework the ultimate. We're going to increase the size by a factor of 4/3, which is going to increase the radius of the zone to 375 from 325. Okay, so what we did is we increased the ult size by 1/3. Now we're going to reduce the knockup by 1/3. So theoretically, this should be a sort of balanced change. Okay, we're increasing the radius and we're reducing the knockup. Here's why I like this change. Okay, when Malphite ultimate hits, it's not incredibly disgustingly OP where we just one-shot your whole team because you have 1.5 seconds of uncleansable CC. And the whole game isn't over if Malphite lands a good ultimate, because the knockup is reduced by 1 second. But because we increase the radius, it's more likely that Malphite will land a good ultimate, but his ultimates that he does land aren't as horrifying, right? So if I ult the mid lane Akali and she hourglasses, because my bonus range also caught the top laner and the support, it's not as horribly punishing when Akali presses hourglass, because I can actually hit more of the targets when I press R. So one guy having stopwatch or one guy having flash doesn't make my ultimate do nothing, right? So that's a change that I really like. I like it a lot for a lot of reasons, okay? Now, I also want to change the speed, because the speed previously was about 1825 plus bonus move speed. What I want to do is do 1600 plus total move speed. So this is theoretically an increase of 90 speed to the ultimate. So it's more reliable to hit. It hits more reliably because it's harder to flash and it's faster, but the knockup is less, so when I do hit, it does less. So we're going to see more good Malphite ultimates, but they're not going to be quite as good. So this means is if you queue up as Malphite, you're more likely to have a decent game, and you're less likely to have a bad game, but you're also less likely to have an amazing game, right? So we're smoothing out what this champion is a little bit. Okay, so another thing this does when you have the speed change to total move speed bonus instead of bonus move speed bonus is that if Malphite is slowed by 99% by set, his ultimate is really slow. So you introduce a little bit of counterplay to where I want to use my slow on Malphite because then it's easier for my AD carry to dodge his ultimate. So you have a little bit more counterplay from the perspective of how do I protect my AD carry from Malphite? If I'm playing Sona, how do I protect my AD carry from Malphite? You know, it's like a little 40 health shield. It does nothing. It feels really bad. But if I'm playing Sona and I power chord slow, then I'm slowing down the Malphite ultimate, which makes it easier for my AD carry to flash. So I want to do the thing where Malphite speed is reduced if you slow the Malphite, because it makes it feel a little better for people like, for supports like Braum, because Braum can Q slow Malphite and help his AD carry. Sona can slow the Malphite and help the AD carry. You know, a lot of things like this. Ashe is famously horrible against Malphite. Ashe is really bad against Malphite. But now Volley Slow reduces the speed of Malphite ultimate. So Ashe is a little bit better against Malphite. Right? Stuff like this. So here's some of the notes that I made. You know, AD carries won't feel like it's impossible to beat Malphite when they don't have flash, because the knockup is actually shorter. But they should also feel less confident in their ability to actually flash the ultimate in the first place. So we're removing the toxic elements of the Malphite that make it feel unplayable for the enemy, and also the toxic aspects that make it feel unplayable for yourself, which is that it can be tough to hit more than one target. And if the target you have hourglasses, it feels really bad, okay? So it doesn't feel impossible to win, or it doesn't feel impossible to do something that is productive. It doesn't feel impossible, you know, it makes it feel less impossible to succeed for both teams, okay? So, you know, depending on the situation, okay, as I just explained. Alright, so Malphite is worse at team assassinations of a flashless AD carry, as we explained before. But his ultimate is harder to flash and hits more reliably. So you're more likely to get a good play, you're less likely to get a bad play, and you're less likely to get a great play. This actually feels better for most players. Okay, it feels better. I think Malphite pick rate will go way up with the changes that I'm suggesting, by landslides. People will love playing Malphite more than they ever have in the history of League of Legends. And it won't be OP. Okay? So if Malphite can hit an extra target because of this change, his knockup duration could be increased, in theory. Okay? Without making the game unplayable for one person. Right? So I get knocked out for 1.5 seconds and I'm dead. You know, I played solo queue games as Ashe, and I was counterpicked by Malphite support. And I was like, yeah, I'm winning CS, and we're getting tower damage, and this is so great, and everything's amazing. And then Malphite presses R from the brush, and I'm dead. And I'm like, oh wow, that sucks. And then you go back to lane, you know, and then Malphite presses R from the brush, and I'm dead. And it's just like you just die and die and die and die, and it feels like it's impossible to do anything. You know, it's like you can shoot your hawk shot every once in a while, but when your hawk shot is off cooldown, it feels like you can't even walk up to get CS. Because Malphite's going to ult you from the brush and you're just going to die. You know, and if you don't have a sub, you know, 300 millisecond reaction time when you're playing AD carry against Malphite, you basically 100 to 0 die, even if you have flash, because you don't have time to flash the ultimate if your reaction time is not above average, from my experience. Okay. So I said before, the speed of the ultimate could be less, specifically in situations where Malphite is slowed by at least 30% when he casts his ultimate, which increases the counterplay. This is like saying it's a little bit of a buff to Ashe versus Malphite. Right? It's maybe a little bit of a buff for Varus versus Malphite, because Varus can E-slow the Malphite, which makes his ultimate slower, and Varus can more easily flash the Malphite ultimate. So you're kind of, the champions who are historically terrible against Malphite are now just bad against him. They're not terrible against him anymore. Now they're just bad. So we want to avoid things like Malphite is just god tier against these few champions, but he's absolute garbage against these. You just like play Malphite against Ezreal and see how fun it is. It's like you will literally go a 70-minute game and you hit Ezreal with 0 ultimates. So, you know, or even like a Corki or a Lucian. A lot of times you'll get 0 ults on those champions. You know, if you're playing like top lane Malphite and you have like a jungler ganking and Udyr stuns, obviously in that situation you can hit your Malphite ultimate if Udyr is going to stun the target. But a lot of times it's pretty tough to be effective. So the next thing I want to move to is the Q rework, because I actually reworked every single one of Malphite's abilities, every single one. Okay, so here's the Q rework. The most toxic thing about Malphite, from my perspective, is his laning. Okay, even more toxic than his ultimate counterplay. So Malphite Q, okay, costs so much mana. If you use Q to trade in lane, you will literally lose all of your mana and be able to do nothing before the enemy is half HP. So you can burn your entire mana pool and the guy's not even half HP. So the mana cost. So if you want to talk about damage per mana, for Malphite Q is garbage. Okay, so Malphite Q is not a good ability for laning phase. It's terrible. It's really, really bad. It's really bad. Okay, so here's the change that I want to make. Okay, I want to turn Malphite Q into a 1-point wonder. Okay, Malphite Q is a 1-point wonder. Now, most people are going to freak out when I say this, because they're going to be like, Malphite is an AP mid laner, and I have to max Q so that I can buy Stork Boots and Q you twice, ult ignite, and then you're dead. Okay, so that strategy is one of the worst things about Malphite. Okay, is that he can max Q with Stork Boots, you know, and at level 9 Q you twice for 600 damage. Okay, ult you for, you know, 200, you know, E for another, you know, it's like, he Qs you twice, ult ignite, and you're just gone. And it's like, I can't dodge Malphite Q. It's just a targeted ability. Right, so I see a lot of lower level players just getting gooba stomped by mid lane Malphite with Q max Stork Boots. And it feels like, it's like, what do I even do against this? You know, if I ever go in range of his Q, I just lose the lane. Automatically. Right? So that's the thing that I don't like that part about Malphite. Right? It's like he's ignoring CS, and he's just Q you once, Q you twice. Okay, ult Q ignite. Right? It's 3 Qs, ult ignite, and you're dead. You're just gone. You're just gone. Right? So I don't like that part about Malphite. And so if there were one part about Malphite that I would take away in order to fix the rest of his stuff, that would be it. Okay, so another thing I want to talk about here is that, let's say you have Malphite against Sion in top lane, and you're both level 18. Okay, so what you do, your Malphite, you walk up and you press Q onto Sion, and his shield blocks more than half of your Q damage. And you're just like, oh, this is fun. And Malphite is like, oh, I want to walk up and AoE down the minion wave, and then you're like knocked up by Sion Q, you're slowed, and then he's doing % health damage, and he's like, I will, you know, kill the entire wave, stun you, slow you, you know, damage you, and you won't even hurt me. So Scion Q is more damage than Malphite Q. Okay, Scion Shield is more damage than Malphite E, as I understand it. It's also magic damage, which means Malphite can't reduce that damage. Right? So, based on Malphite's kit, Scion can permanently push into his tower with zero threat of dying, ever. He will never be under threat of dying, ever. And he can permanently push into the tower. Malphite can do nothing, and it's just really, feels really bad. Right? Same with Cho'Gath. Try and play Malphite against Cho'Gath. Okay, the laning phase, early lane phase is a little bit easier than some of the other champions that you would generally use to counterpick the Malphite. But once you get into the late game, Malphite, all he can do is run away. He just runs away. Because if he tries to go melee range of Cho'Gath, okay, Cho'Gath's E will do more damage to Malphite just with the E, because it's magic percent health, and Malphite builds armor and health most of the time. Okay, so Cho'Gath can press E and auto-attack you 3 times, and he does more damage than your entire combo. Basically. With just E auto-attack 3 times. Because it's like, what, it's 8% max health 3 times, right? With Cho'Gath? So you're doing 24% of your max health. You know, it's just gross. So you can go into lane with Malphite. If you're building the normal armor Malphite build, which is efficient, you know, you want to build armor and health, you can go full combo the Cho'Gath, and he will literally auto-attack you 3 times with his E, and the trade will be even. Okay, it's really gross. It's unplayable. So, Malphite is super weak against Cho'Gath, he's super weak against Scion, and he's not even particularly good. We're talking about late game split pushing. Malphite is not even particularly good against champions like Fiora, or champions like Gnar. So he's not even good against the AD, the attack damage matchups. He's an armor building champion, and he can't win the full attack damage matchups. He can't win against Fiora. She literally presses one ability, and his ultimate does nothing. Malphite gets hard countered in lane by basically every champion in the game. And it's really gross. It's super gross. It's like really bad, you know, like there's maybe 1 or 2 mid lane matchups where Malphite can build ability power and just like end up one-shotting you. Or, you know, a couple of Q harass taps and then you just get one-shot. But most matchups for Malphite, he loses early game and he loses late game. And his entire team fight is countered by Zhonya's Hourglass. It feels really bad, man. There's situations where Malphite is super good. Most of the time, he's just garbage. So he's either amazing or terrible, and I don't like champions like that. It's really, it's like, when you queue to play a game, it's like either this is the worst game of my life, or I'm just like hard carrying, right? Because if the other team locks in like Rumble Akali, and I'm Malphite and I'm trying to just like ult people, it feels really bad. Like, let's go Rumble Akali Ezreal and try to play Malphite against those champions. You will feel so worthless. You will feel completely worthless. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We want to buff Malphite's ability to play against top lane bruisers, to limit the ability to counterpick Malphite in lane. This allows him to get a bit more CS, so that when he does ult into 5 people and whiffs because of Hourglass, he doesn't die so quickly, because maybe he has a few more items. So we want to take away that negative aspect of it. And we already talked about how increasing the area of effect of the ult reduces the chance that he's just going to get flashed out of, because, you know, technically if with that 375 radius, you know, you can, it's a lot, you cover a lot more zone, and you're more likely to hit on 2 or 3 targets. Like, you might be able to tag mid, support, and top lane instead of just tagging mid, right? So it's just going to feel better, but it has slightly less ability to just like one-shot, one carry out of the game. And anytime you're getting one shot out of the game, that's not fun for you. So it's less fun for the other team when they just get one shot, and it's less fun for the Malphite when the other team can just use Hourglass and make him worthless. So we're trying to get rid of the parts that I think are unfun. So here's the reworked Q. Okay, so the Q damage is going to be mostly percent max health damage. Remember we talked about before, he's really bad against Cho'Gath and Scion, and he's really bad against champions that stack health, because he can't ever burst them down. The reason Malphite is good is because he presses R, and during his 1.5 second knockup, his allies can come in and kill you. Right? Malphite is not good because in the way where he can counter Jack's top lane. Right? It's not the area where Malphite is good. There's a point where Malphite does do okay against some of the auto attack based champions because of his attack speed slow. But it's really rough a lot of the time. Anyway, so here we go. The rework Q, and I did all the numbers before you freak out because you see, 8% max and 8% missing in the same ability. I ran the numbers. It's never OP. It's never OP at any point in time. So I ran all the numbers. I did a bunch of examples. So let's go through here, okay? Q rework deals 8% max HP plus 8% missing HP damage. The base damage is 10 per level. So I can't max mid Malphite and Q you for 250 damage at level 9 when your total HP pool is like 900. Or something like that. Maybe it's 1,000. Right? I can't do a quarter of your damage with one ability. That is a targeted ability. Right? So the base damage level up is 10 per level. Okay? So we're going to see, there's going to be upside to this, okay? So there's one of the other abilities that has base damage max up of 10 per level is like, there are other abilities that have the same value, but I can't remember what they are. It's like Cho'Gath E is like 15 per level or something very low. Like that. Like Irelia Q is pretty low level max up damage. Anyway, so, we're dealing 150% damage to minions and monsters. So this is, yes, we want to make Malphite jungle something that can work. Here's why. If I pick Malphite, I get instantly counterpicked, and it's impossible for me to have fun because I'm counterpicked so hard, and I get crushed in lane, and it's horrifying, okay? If Malphite might go jungle, now you can't just counterpick me. So the fact that Malphite jungle is terrible actually makes Malphite almost unplayable. So the Q is 8% max plus 8% missing, and we're going to deal 150% damage to minions / monsters. Notice minions as well, okay? So we're going to refund half the cost and the cooldown if it kills a minion or monster. So, yes, the initial cooldown is 12 seconds. The initial cooldown got upped by a lot. Right? By 4 seconds. However, it's halved if I kill a minion or monster. So if I'm going from wolves to blue, and I use my Q to last hit the big wolf, my Q is instantly up again for blue buff. Right? So there's a lot of things where this is going to be okay. Alright? The mana cost is down to 70 at all ranks. Now this is something that I considered. Instead of 70 at all ranks, I was going to do 50 to 90. Right now it's 70 to 90. But I considered 50 to 90. Okay? The reason I didn't do 50 to 90 is the Q is actually kind of a one-hit wonder. 1-point wonder, I should say. In a way. It's kind of like looking at this and saying, your base health of a top lane champion at level 1 is like 600 to 700, right? So let's say it's 700. Let's say it's a champion that builds Doran's Shield or Doran's Blade or something, and they get a little bonus health there, and let's say they're at 700, right? So, 10% of that is 7D, right? So, 5% of that is 35. So you're kind of like looking like halfway in between there. You're kind of looking 8%. Another way you do is 1% of 700 is, what, 7, right? 7 times 8, 56. Right, 56. So you have 56 damage at level 1 plus 10. It used to be 70. Now it's 66. So the base damage is slightly nerfed. The cooldown is up. Why is that okay? Two reasons. First reason, it has max HP and missing HP. Okay, so when the target is at half HP, it goes from 56 to, you know, you're adding almost 30 damage if the target's at half HP. Almost 30 damage you're adding if the target's half HP. So suddenly it's like 80, 90 damage if the target's getting low. So you're kind of saying you're going from between 60 something, depending on, let's say 65, we're going sliding between 65 and 90 damage on Q. Right? So if you're using it repeatedly, and you're using it when they're on low HP, your damage is actually increased when you're only putting 1 point into the ability. Additionally, I refund half the cost and cooldown if I use it to last hit a minion. So not only does this do technically increased damage at level 1, okay, I can also use it to last hit minions. That is why the cooldown is longer. Cooldown is 12 seconds. Right, so because it's theoretically stronger, if you're using it when they're on low HP, if the other guy never gets to low health, if he's always full health, technically it's weaker in just dueling, but you're adding the fact that you can use it to last hit minions. So I'm expecting, at 10 minutes, Malphites should have at least 10 to 15 extra CS, just because of this change. Purely because of this change. Right? And again, what we're doing is we took half a second off the ultimate. So his upside is down. We increased the radius, more reliable. Harder to flash. If there's a bigger radius, and you flash directly backwards, but I put it slightly behind you, you're still going to get hit. Like now you have to flash sideways, because you can't just flash all the way out and over the ability. There's a wider area, you have to flash, it's harder to flash out of it, right? But the knockup is less. Okay, so the Q, maxing the Q is worse because I can't just spam Q and get you out of lane, but 1 point in Q is better. Right? Now here's where it goes south. At the moment, I put 2 points in Q. Okay? This damage only goes up by 10. The base damage only goes up by 10, and the percent health stays the same. Right? So if I put 2 points in Q, this ability is objectively worse than it used to be. If I max Q, it's like half the strength that it was before. But if I'm only putting 1 point in Q, then we're fine. Right? So we took away the toxic aspect of Malphite, which is that I'm playing Heimerdinger, and he Qs me twice and I'm half HP. It's like Sork Boots Rush with Q-Max Malphite, and it's like Comet Malphite Q-Max with Sork Boots, and Heimerdinger gets Q'd twice and he's half HP, you ult Ignite and he's dead. But that part's gone. You can't do that anymore. Okay, that part's gone. But what you can do is you can Q a minion every 6 seconds and not run out of mana in lane. Right? So you're kind of getting, like, I get some CS, but now I can't just Gooba Stomp players that don't use magic resist runes, and are playing low base health champions. Okay, so here's kind of the next part of it. Which is makes the jungling stronger, and it also makes the late game pretty good. Okay, so passive. Attacking champions or large monsters that are being slowed by Q reduces the cooldown by 1 second per attack. Okay? So if I'm using Q first in the jungle, and I'm attacking the jungle camps, let's say I attack, you really, technically with Malphite jungle is low attack speed, so you attack twice every 3 seconds. Right, so at the point where the cooldown would normally be at 9 seconds, now it's at 7. Make sense? You go 2 more seconds, where it would normally be at, you're at 7 now, you attack 2 more times the next 3 seconds, which puts you down to 4, and now there's 2 seconds left. You attack, so you technically, if you're jungling, this Q cooldown is down from 12 to 7. If you're just attacking the whole time. So for jungling, this cooldown is reduced by 1 second. For laning, it's upped by 4. So hopefully that makes sense. You know, you want to look at the health of blue buff. Elise double Q does about the same amount of damage as the Malphite Q. It's similar damage. Similar damage. You know, I'm trying to think, Elise Q is like, it's like 8% max health, and then 12% missing health, plus a base of like 40. So with this 150% bonus damage, it's similar to Elise Q. I don't know if it's exactly Elise Q. I didn't do the exact math, but it's similar to Elise Q. Okay, it's similar. You know, Elise Q has longer range than Malphite Q, but the second portion also has to be in melee range. So, and it also doesn't slow. So technically, Malphite level 1 is actually stronger than Elise. In theory. Here's the problem. The 8% missing HP damage doesn't apply ever on the first Q. With Elise, the missing percent portion, you know, when Elise presses the melee Q for the first time, the buff has already lost 10% of its health. So there's, you know, she's getting some value out of the missing health damage even the very first time that she presses Q. Right, because you use the QW, and that bursts the buff to a decent amount of low HP, you know, and then, so technically, in theory, Elise is actually more damage to minions at level 1 of this ability, but misses the slow. Is missing the slow. So, you know, it's nice to compare these abilities to other champions. It gets you kind of an idea of the relative power, okay? So here we go. Here's some of the math that I did. So against caster minions, this should deal from 80 to 120 damage. You know, when minions are level 18 with, what's like 600 health, caster minions, they start at 300, they go to somewhere around 600, I think. It deals anywhere from 80 to 120 damage when the minion is at 20% HP, and that's before resistances, so at rank 1. So basically, if you can last hit with auto attacks, you can last hit with Q. It's going to deal 80 to 120 to a low health minion. So this refunding the cooldown when you last hit a minion or monster, this is legit. Okay, this is legit. So you can walk up, press Q to last hit a minion, get a movement speed boost, run away, and you know you're going to see Malphites getting 10 to 15 more CS at 15 minutes than they usually would, just because of this change. That's that's my estimation. It could be more in certain matchups. Anyway, yeah. So here we're going to Q at 1,000 health enemy. Okay. So say the enemy has 1,000 health. So this would be, you know, maybe level 9. About level 9, depending on what the enemy champion is building. You know, it's about level 9. Let's say it's level 9, right? 1,000 health, okay? So against a 1,000 HP target, at level 1, this Q does 90 damage. The old Q at level 1 did 70 damage. So this is a better, if you only put 1 point in Q, it's a lot better. If you're maxing this ability, it's worse. Okay, it's just worse if you're trying to max it. You don't want to max it. Okay. So this is a nerf to toxic AP Malphite Q spam, where he just goes Sword Boots and Qs you twice and you're half HP. It's not fun. Okay, it's really, really not fun, and it's not something that you want to play against. Okay, so maybe at the higher elos, the enemy mid laner won't even let you get in range to press the Q, and he won't actually get harassed down, but this can be super toxic, especially because if you're rushing Sword Boots, you usually have more boost speed than the other guy. So you can get in range to Q a couple times pretty easily. Anyway, so when you're rank 5 maxing Q with his new version of the ability, okay, you're kind of doing about 130 damage on the full HP target. But you're costing 30% less mana. Okay, but if, what is this? What did I do here? Same cooldown. So you're kind of going 30% less mana, but half the damage. So you're losing out on like 20%. So it's less efficient the first time you Q someone. Basically always. Okay. Okay, the maximum Q damage here is 210 against a 0 HP target, right? Which never actually happens. So, it's less than that, realistically. Which is lower than before, which was 270. So you're losing 60 damage, even in the case where you're queuing a very low HP target. Okay, however, the mana cost is 30% less. Okay, so the damage, 30% of 270. Okay, 10% is 27 times, what's 27 times 3? It's almost 90 damage. Okay, so you're losing 60 damage here. So, but technically the Q damage per mana is better. Okay, Q damage per mana is better. Right, but the total damage of the Q... Okay, so what I'm saying here is that in this situation where the guy's like less than 20% health, the Q damage per mana is better. If they're full health, the Q damage per mana is still worse. Okay, but if you're in a situation where the guy's low health, the Q actually kind of slowly becomes better. Right? So here the Q damage zone is somewhere between, if you're maxing it, is... I messed up here. This should be 130. Right? Because it's 90... it's 80 plus 50 if they have 1,000 health. That's 30. So why does this say 160? Alright, so we'll fix it. So this, where does this put the average? Holy moly. 340 divided by 2 is 170. So this is a 170. The difference goes up by 15, which puts it to 100. Right, so now you're saying that the 30% mana reduction, 30% damage reduction would be, it's 81, right? I'm pretty sure that it's 81. Yeah, so you would theoretically have 20 less damage per mana. Or 20 less, you're losing out on about 20 damage. Because if this ability, if the damage here that we calculated were 81 less damage than before, then it would be technically the same efficiency. But it's 100 less damage than before. So the efficiency is worse, okay? If you're only using your Q to harass the enemy, it's worse. Objectively. At all levels. Okay, at all levels, it's worse. Whether you max it, you don't max it, it's always worse than before if you're using it to harass the enemy. If you're using it to last hit minions, it's more than twice as good. It's more than double the efficiency. If you're just using it to last hit minions, it's very good. Okay, very good. You're going to be able to get at least one extra minion per wave. Because you have the cooldown. You probably get 2 extra minions on the early waves. But yeah, it is a big difference. But you can't harass people down in the same way you did before. Anyway, what I'd say here is that, this should allow Malphite to survive things like Jax or Gnar without going down, 50 plus CS. Okay, so here we have the average Q is 170, and it costs 20 less mana. So you're losing 100 damage on each Q, but it's 20 mana cheaper. That's pretty bad. That's not too good. However, every time you Q a minion, you gain 35 mana. In theory, compared to what you would have done before. Right, so I think this is a buff to Malphite Q. I think it's a buff. It's a nerf maybe to AP Malphite. But in general, it's a buff to jungle Malphite, it's a buff to top lane Malphite. Okay. So we'll keep going here. Again, we're fixing the main weaknesses in lane, but we're losing 1v1 early mid-game kill potential when we're maxing Q with Stork Boots. Right, so there's a big, big dip in Malphite's ability to 1v1 you and kill you 1v1, but there's also a big increase to his ability to get minion kills. Right. So in the lanes that I see Malphite, he's basically hugging his tower, and he's just trying to get experience, and every once in a while he'll get some CS. This will change that a lot. Okay, Malphite's going to be a lot more competitive in his CS values because of this. But also, in the situation where Malphite gets a gank, he's less likely to kill the guy. That's pretty much true all the time. So it's just a little change that I think will make playing Malphite less roller coaster. So here with the next calculation. Oh, what I said here is also because you have an easier lane, you should really nerf late game AP scaling on Q to 50% from 60%. Because this will Malphites are going to get at 10 minutes, they're going to get probably 15 extra CS, right? Which is an amp tone. So, like, technically, mid-game Malphite is going to do more damage because of this. Because he's getting more CS. So you're buffing mid-game AP Malphite with this change because he's going to get more creep score, which means he's going to have more AP. So you have to cut the scaling a bit to make up for that, in my opinion. So easier lane means more gold, which means reducing the AP scaling of Q from 50%, or to 60%, sorry, to 50% from 60%. We're cutting Malphite AP scaling on Q. Right? Because this makes Malphite lane Q farming means he gets more gold, means he gets more AP, which means you're technically buffing mid-game Malphite. Which wasn't our goal. Okay, our goal was to make the lane phase easier and make it more playable and make it not feel like you're just getting crushed and you can't even last hit minions. The goal was to make the Malphite feel better to play, not to just buff AP mid Malphite mid-game. So we gotta cut the scaling because we know that Malphite's gonna get more gold from minions. Right? But we don't want to cut it too much because we also know that Malphite's gonna get less kills in lane. Because his Q damage is less. So we're kind of we're trying to find a balance here that is okay. Alright? And the video is going to cut here in a minute. It's going to run out of time, and then I have to restart the recording, but I think I have time to finish this last part. So essentially, Malphite is worse at harassing people out of lane, but better at getting consistent CS. Better getting consistent CS and dealing damage to high max HP or consistently low HP targets. So I'll try to say that again. I actually wrote this kind of badly. I should take out this comma. Okay, so he's worse at harassing people, but he's better at CSing, and he's better against high HP targets, he's better against high max health targets and low current health targets. He's a little better at assassinating, but he's worse at poking you down. Overall, it's a nerf to kill pressure. Oh, I thought I was going to stop, but it didn't. It kept going. Okay, so we don't have to cut the video. Okay, worse at harassing, better at assassinating, in theory. He's better at finishing the low HP targets. He's worse at harassing them down. He's better at getting CS, but his AP scaling is slightly worse. So you can see how there's always a balance, okay? Worse at harassing people down, okay, but he's better at finishing off the low HP targets, okay? He's better at farming, but his AP scaling is slightly worse. Okay, so there's a balance to all of this that makes Malphite more playable, because the Q spam AP harassing people out of lane is super toxic at certain elo. Okay, I don't know if you've seen an AP Malphite go like 9-0, but I have. Okay, it gets really ugly if Sorkshoe's Malphite with Qmax starts getting kills, because he will literally Q you for 1/3 of your health. It's really, really gross. So we want to nerf the Qmax Malphite with AP. We want to make it easier to farm, and we know that once it's easier to farm, we're getting more ability power, which means we have to reduce the scaling slightly. Okay, so I think all of this will make the games more playable for the non-Malphite player, and it will make the games more playable for the Malphite player, because you kind of have something to do in lane other than just wait for the minion wave to hit your tower. Okay, so we're going to go to the next portion, which is late game against a Scion, and this is how I mathed this out. Okay, this is a 4,000 health Scion. So the Q at level 5 will do 370 damage when Scion is full HP. And it will do 690 damage when Scion is at 0 HP. Okay, so what we set up here before was that Malphite is notoriously terrible against tanks. He's notoriously garbage against tank champions. Because all of his abilities have, kind of low scaling and high base damage. Right? So, if you're like Azir and you have good scaling, you can just, DPS down the tank pretty easily. Okay, Malphite, not the best scaling. So if you're up against a Scion who has maybe a Force of Nature, and you Q, Malphite Qs the Scion, he doesn't even break the shield with his Q. He does literally nothing to the Scion. Basically nothing. He can't touch the Scion. It's really, really sad. And he gets completely pushed into tower, the Malphite does. He gets all the way pushed into tower, and he basically just loses towers. Right? And he can't, if he TPs out, because the wave is already pushed to his tower, the Scion can easily just choose, should I take the tower? Or should I TP to counter the Malphite TP? Right? So it's really hard to get control of the side lane with the Malphite. It's basically impossible. Basically impossible. And, there's a lot of champions like bruiser type champions that can get control of the side lane against tanks. And for Malphite, Scion is pretty unplayable in the lane, in the late game laning phase. But against like a Gnar or something, it can be even worse. It can be even worse. Okay, because Gnar can use Hop to dodge your ultimate. If he's good. Right. So, what did we do here? We increased the radius by 50. Can Gnar still hop out of Malphite ult? I'm not sure if he can. So one of the best counters to Malphite is Gnar, because he harasses him down at range. But what did we do? We reduced the knockup by 1 second so that we could increase the radius. So Malphite ult is more reliable, but it has a lower upside. More playable for Malphite. That was the goal. That's what we accomplished. Right? I think we're doing good here. Okay. So here's what happens if he's playing a Scion. And Scion has 4k health. Okay, the Q is objectively better in all situations against a tank. The Q is objectively worse in all situations against a squishy champion. So what do we know about Malphite? He's super OP against squishy champions, and he's terrible against tanks. So we make him a bit worse against the squishies, and we make him better against the tanks. So, right? So we're making it, instead of just being horribly OP or disgustingly bad, we're kind of smoothing out the edges here. Right? So now Malphite is better against tanks than he was before. He's worse against squishies than he was before, because his knockup is now 1 second only, which means it's harder to one-shot the guy that he ults. If that guy is squishy, that extra half second might mean the difference between life and death. Okay, when you're playing against a tank, this extra 100 damage on Q with a lower mana cost by 20 could actually add up to the point where the Scion is now afraid of dying, or the Scion is getting harassed when he tries to push your tower, and he's like, I don't know if I want to take that much damage, because if I TP into a team fight on low HP, that's not good for me. So you're kind of reaching the point where maybe the Malphite can threaten the Scion to an extent where Scion can't just push him into his tower permanently and TP whenever he wants. So you're making it more livable for the Malphite in a tank matchup, and you're making it more livable for the AD carry in that specific matchup. So you're not like, it's not just either super good or horrible. Now it's pretty good and okay. Right? I like that. I like doing that with champions. I think it makes the game more fun for everyone. For everyone. Okay. So here, Malphite is notorious for doing 0 damage to tanks and is completely destroyed by things like Cho'Gath. Okay, this change brings him to a point where he does about 2/3 of Cho'Gath harassment on tanks specifically, but he does it with a longer range. So Cho is still doing more damage if he gets to EU, but Malphite can do that damage from a longer range. So the fact that Malphite is 2/3 of Cho harass damage, this takes into consideration, this assumes specifically that, first of all, you're actually getting to use your passive. to reduce the Q cooldown. Second of all, you're actually queuing not just when they're max HP, but also once they're getting lower HP. So this incorporates the fact that, you know, for half of the time, they're 0 HP. In theory, they're 0 HP for half the time, and they're max HP for half the time. If you do the math that way, and you queue them repeatedly as they slowly get lower health, you kind of get a decent value. And based on the fact that you're also queuing them at low health, and you're also getting the reduced cooldown on Q, with the attacks, you know, at decent intervals, you're kind of getting in the range where you're getting in that 2/3 of Cho'Gath harassment range. So you're still going to get pushed out by a Cho'Gath when you're playing Malphite. But it's not as bad. Okay, it's much, much better for the Malphite. It's much less horrifying to try to deal with a Cho'Gath split push when you're playing Malphite. You still can't win, but you're much closer to being able to win. You know, as we saw here, the damage to the 4k HP tank is 100 more for every Q than it used to be, and you're also saving 20 mana. So if we remember up here with this Q change, the early game Q, okay, was 100 less damage. Okay, the late game Q is 100 more damage. You know, this was, you know, the average, this was average damage, and this is initial damage. This is first Q damage. But, you know, you're kind of seeing, difference here. Malphite can kind of hang with Cho'Gath a little bit better. You know, Malphite can kind of hang with Scion a little bit better. And if the other guy has only 2,000 health, your Q is kind of the same as it used to be. But if the guy is stacking HP, you can kind of roll with him a little bit. And it's not so horrifying. Right. So, we're going to go to the next thing, which is 2k HP 80 carry. The minimum Q is 170 to 210. So that's the Q when he's on max HP. The maximum Q is the Q when they're on 0 HP, which is 370. So say we're maxing the ability, okay? You go 210 to 370. Right? Usually they're not going to let you Q them if they're already on low HP. So you're going to get consistently more Qs off when they're already high HP most of the time. So you can see that this is a 60-point difference from the old to the new value on the initial Q, but it's a 100% damage difference from the initial Q, specifically when they're at 0 HP, but you're not queuing them very often when they're at 0 HP. So you can see I stacked from, you know, here's 60 difference, here's, you know, minus 60 to plus 100, because you're getting less Qs off when they're at high HP, so the difference here can be higher. Right, and what we also said is we reduced the AP scaling by 10%. So if I'm a Malphite with 500 damage, 10% is minus 50. Or, sorry, 500 HP. AP, ability power. 500 ability power Malphite. This 10% is minus 50 damage. Okay, so what happens when we take a 50 damage off here and a 50 damage off here? You know, it's not quite working out like that. Because as this damage gets higher, the percentage difference will be smaller. But you can see that with this AP nerf, the Q is not actually better than it used to be on the lower HP targets. Okay, but on the lower targets with lower max health, the Q is not better. Okay, it's not. Even in the late game, it's not better. Okay. However, it should be low current health. If the 80 carry has low current health, his Q damage is buffed by about 100. If it's low current health. So something that Malphite gets really bad at in the late game is when the 80 carry builds Shield Bow, and the 80 carry has a Karma, and you're sitting there like, I ulted and used everything, and the 80 carry's not even half health. Right, but what can we do now that we couldn't do before? Is we do increased damage when they're lower health. Okay. And if I get the chance to auto-attack them while they're slowed, I can reduce this cooldown, and I can almost permanently slow them. Almost. Okay. So, the level 18 Malphite, in theory, against a Shield Bow 80 carry, is saying, okay, if I get to Q you on low HP, I'm doing more damage. If I get to attack you repeatedly, you know, if your team's not peeling for you, if your team allows me to hit you repeatedly, you are going to get chased down until you die. Right? However, my knockup is reduced by 1 second, or by half a second. Right? So it's easier for the AD carry to survive the initial burst. However, if you look here, because of this passive, because I can ult on top of you, you're slowed while I'm in melee range, and I can probably get 2 auto attacks off, maybe 3 auto attacks off. Puts this cooldown to 5 seconds with a 3-second slow. Okay. You're adding CDR. You're almost permaslowed by Malphite. You're almost permaslowed. Almost permaslowed. Okay. So if Malphite is going to be that bad in lane, if Malphite's going to have 0 kill pressure in lane, okay, if Malphite's not going to have enough AP scaling to one-shot you, right, if Malphite's not going to have, you know, all these things that Malphite doesn't have, he's got to have upside, right? And in the current state, Malphite is not considered a very good champion by most people, specifically in pro play, because he gets just shafted in lane so hard. Right. So what did we do here? Ult knockup is reduced by half a second. Team fighting is probably worse. Okay, technically you gain 50 radius, but the knockup is reduced by half a second. And if you get slowed, you know, it's actually easier for them to dodge your ultimate. So you have an objective, in my opinion, what is a nerf to the ultimate. I think it's a nerf to the ultimate. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think the wider AoE is better than the extra knockup. I don't think it is. Maybe you think it is. But I don't necessarily think it is. I think it's different. It's more reliable. There's less downside. But I don't think it's objectively stronger or weaker. You know, I don't think that, you know, 50 radius is better than half a second knockup. I don't think it is. Okay, so I mean, you welcome to your opinions, and I'm sure you have a very good reason if you disagree with me. But that's my opinion, and I respect if I respect your opinion if you disagree completely. Okay. So again, you know, Malphite's notoriously doing 0 damage to tanks, so we buff his late game damage to tanks. Okay. You know, better at killing the low current health champions. So what we see here is Malphite has a higher potential to chain slow on a single target and chase them down with repeated Qs if he can get auto attacks off on them. Okay, so what I said is, you know, this kind of makes up for the reduced knockup on ult single target. So what this means is if I am only using ultimate on one target, it's pretty much just worse. Because the extra radius doesn't do a lot against one target unless it's Gnar. Against Gnar, this is a really big buff to Malphite versus Gnar, by the way, which is one of the things that I think is really important, is that Gnar maybe can't hop out of ult anymore. But anyway, so, you know, you say that if I'm single target, let's say I'm playing 1v1 against a Jax. Against the Jax, my ultimate is objectively worse, because the extra radius doesn't help me against a Jax, and the only thing that happened is the knockup duration was reduced. So against a Jax, in 1v1, I'm worse, because my ultimate just does less. But what I have is the higher potential to chain slow on the target, and chase them down with repeated Qs. So I have a higher threat of getting my team to roam top while I repeatedly slow you and chase you down. So you're more afraid of getting killed because I can chain, if I get to auto attack you, I can chain Q and really slow you for a long time. Right? You know, and there may be a world where we have to reduce the move speed bonus that you get on the Q, because this reducing the cooldown of the Q becomes broken. And if I'm building, like, let's say I'm building, for whatever reason on the Malphite, I'm building attack speed, and, you know, I can attack you, I can get this cooldown down to 4 seconds. If I just repeatedly attack you. So I'm basically permanently slowing, and I just get to attack freely and infinitely while you're slowed and can't get away. Right? So this could potentially become really OP if it's not carefully balanced. But basically, it's the concept that matters. You know, maybe this cooldown is reduced by 1 second per attack. You know, maximum of 3 attacks. Right. So, you know, I can't technically, you know, maximum of 2 attacks. You know. Or just 1 second, period. You know, maximum of 1 attacks. Alright, maximum of 2. So, you know, this can be appropriately balanced to where it's not disgustingly OP. Right now, I'll leave it at 2 attacks. Actually, I'll just put it at 1. 1 is okay. So, you know, you're getting a minus 1 second to the Q cooldown in exchange for doing a little bit less damage against the lower HP targets that are on max health. That seems reasonable. And then Malphite just needs a buff against tanks, objectively, because he's terrible against tank champions. And the reason we're saying all this is okay is because the knockup is only 1 second now. Which, you may not think that's a lot, but it's a lot. Okay, it's a lot. Imagine if Udyr stun was reduced to... had half a second taken off of it. That champion would be instantly garbage. Instantly garbage. If Udyr Bear Stance had half a second taken off of it, instantly garbage. So, it may not seem like a lot. I think this is actually pretty substantial. Okay. Because it takes the strongest thing about Malphite and kind of chunks it down. Right? And here's the thing. Okay, here's the thing. Yes, Malphite does more damage to tanks. But in the situation where Malphite can't actually kill the tank anyway, in the situation where Malphite can't win the 1v1 anyway, this passive doesn't help him at all. Because he's never going to be able to go into melee range because he's going to lose every trade no matter what. Okay, so there would be a lot of situations where this late game Q buff is purely the only buffed aspect of it is that it does a bit extra damage to high HP targets, and it costs 20 less mana. Because there's very few matchups where Malphite is actually allowed to go into auto attack range in order to reduce the Q cooldown. Okay, but here's what this will do. This will swing certain matchups to where Malphite can actually win the 1v1. And Malphite can actually control and control the side waves. Right, so there's certain matchups where, you know, Gnar can't flash out of ult anymore. And if Gnar gets ulted, and Malphite has CDR, Gnar's kind of going to get permaqueued and chased down by Malphite, and Malphite might actually be able to kill the Gnar. Right? So Gnar can't just go 50 CS up on the Malphite. And there's a point where Malphite can now solo kill the Gnar. So imagine how much more Malphite would be played if Gnar's not a total counter pick. It's actually pretty intense. Because there's going to be specific spots where if Malphite gets a lead, or if Gnar falls behind, Malphite can actually start solo killing the Gnar. And that spot where Malphite can solo kill the Gnar is going to happen more often in games because it's easier for Malphite to get early game CS, and he does more Q damage against Mega Gnar. So he gets more CS, and he does more Q damage against Mega Gnar. He's just better against tanks. He's better against Gnar. He's better against Sion. He's better against Cho'Gath. He's better against anyone who builds health. If that champion is building a single health item, pretty much any health item, Malphite Q is buffed. If you're building 0 health items, Malphite Q is kind of nerfed. Right, so Malphite's already OP against low health champions, so nerfing how good he is against low health champions is kind of okay, because he's actually terrible against high health champions. So we're saying, yes, he's now good against high health champions, but he's a little bit worse against low health champions, and I think it's okay to do it that way, especially considering that he took 1 second off the knockup to get increased radius. So we're making laning Malphite playable in many, far greater number of situations. Solo lane Malphite is more playable. Okay. In what situations is this is perfect going into the, so we'll go through here for a second. Okay, so before we talk about that, we're going to finish here, but just remember that last point that we made. Malphite can actually fight bruisers in the side lane after 15 minutes or so, and not just run away for the entire game while waiting for teamfight ults. Because that's basically what Malphite is right now. He just runs away, and then waits for a teamfight. That is not a fun champion. All you get to do is run away, clear sideways, and wait for a teamfight. That is extremely unfun. It is not fun at all. Okay, so I don't have an issue with reducing Malphite Q cooldown by 1 second, assuming that he gets to auto-attack you while you're slowed. I wouldn't even have, in theory, I wouldn't have an issue with putting this to 1.5 seconds per attack with a maximum of 1 attacks, or increasing the maximum attacks further. I, in theory, don't have an, I would say, let's do 0.75 seconds per attack, but we say it can be a maximum of 2 attacks. So you can technically cut the cooldown by 1.5 seconds from what it previously was, and it also does more damage against high HP targets. Right? So, if the Cho'Gath is pushing top lane, and he's like, oh no, the enemy team is coming to gank me, and Malphite wants to chase down that Cho'Gath, he's going to get more slows, which means Cho'Gath has a higher chance of dying, which means Cho'Gath is more afraid of pushing into Malphite's tower, which means it's easier for Malphite to teleport because his minions aren't always pushed into his tower. So this is just makes side laning more livable for Malphite without, I don't think it makes it OP. Okay, I don't think, reduce cooldown by 1 second if you attack the guy that's slowed. I don't think that's going to suddenly make it game-breakingly OP. It might swing a couple of matchups to where Malphite's more playable, which is theoretically the goal, is to just make Malphite more playable. We're reducing his upside, but we're raising his floor. Which I think is if you do it too much, maybe it's not good. But in this case of Malphite, I think it is good. Because Malphite's a big swing or miss champion. So yeah, Malphite can fight bruisers a little bit. He's a little better at chasing you down, but he's not quite as good at just one-shotting a squishy. Okay, he does more AoE, has a higher chance of hitting the targets that he does ult, he has a higher chance of hitting more targets, but when he does hit the targets, the knockup is slightly less. He can get more CS in lane, because his Q gives mana back if he kills the target, and it also lowers the cooldown if he kills a minion or monster with it. Alright, so we're going to summarize the Q plus R again here, and what it says is, Malphite can fight late game bruisers more easily, and won't just run right to his tower 100% of the time. Okay, it's harder to deny Malphite early CS, but he can't Q-max with Magic Pen and harass people out of lane as easily. Let's fix this spelling. Just take away an R. Okay, Malphite is better at finishing kills by himself when he approaches the later stages of the game, because he can get the auto attack to reduce his Q cooldown by 1 second. And he won't struggle as much versus things like a shield bow carry, or things he can't one-shot, because this 1 second cooldown here, when he attacks the slowed target, means he can stick onto the shield bow target, and he doesn't just have to one-shot them in order to kill them. Okay, he has some chase down potential. Right. And, the last thing was, Malphite ult is more reliable, but probably has a lower upside. Specifically when you're trying to just one-shot someone. Because the knockup is less. So I think this is all good changes to Malphite. I think these are good changes. Okay. The one thing I could say about this that is bad is, why would rolling a rock at someone deal max HP damage? That doesn't make sense. That's the only thing. Why would rolling a rock at someone do damage based on the enemy's max health? That doesn't make sense. Okay, whatever, maybe it doesn't, but this is an objectively more crowd-pleasing champion in terms of if people want to play Malphite, or people that have to play against Malphite, this is more soothing in terms of quality of life for both parties involved. You know, and I don't know that, we're talking about watching pro play now, I don't know that watching a Malphite go down by 100 CS at 20 minutes is fun for the viewers. I think it's kind of dumb. Maybe the viewers like it, you know, but I would rather that the Malphite's down 50 CS, and is a little bit worse in team fights. You know, I prefer that version of it. You know, or is a little bit worse at one-shotting people. You know, so that's kind of the thing. So what do we say here now? Okay, we know that Malphite Q is actually nerfed against low HP targets. So what happens when Malphite has to play against Lucian or Quinn in top lane? If Malphite Q is objectively worse against low HP targets now, because what we said Malphite is really good at is one-shotting a squishy, what Malphite's really good at is just chain CCing someone to death with his team, but what he's terrible at is laning. So what we said is we take away a little bit of the ability to one-shot a squishy, we take away a little bit of the ability to just chain CC someone to death, and we give him some quality of life changes to his laning phase, to make him a little bit more, you know, balanced and healthy champion. So here's what we do. Okay, the bonus armor with Granite Shield is reduced to 2 times from 3 times. Okay, but the armor increase on W level up is going to add 10 flat armor per level. So the Granite Shield bonus armor at level 1 is up to 18 from 12. What does this mean? Laning against Lucian or Quinn is easier, because what the Q against low health targets is nerfed, so we have to make laning against low health targets a little bit easier. Because the goal here is to increase laning quality at the cost of what Malphite is just disgustingly good at. Right? I forgot a period here, but the keyboard is too far away. I'll just fix it. Alright. So the base armor is up by 10 at level 1. If you're, you know, maybe you're not putting a point in W at level 1. You're probably not. So, you know, technically you probably go Q first. Do you last hit minions? So maybe, you know, maybe this is not until level 3 that this actually matters. But I put it at, you know, I just put it at level 1, whatever. You know, but you get 10 more armor than you used to when you first put a point into W. So laning against Lucian is no longer, you know, automatically down 30 CS at 5 minutes. Which I've seen happen. You know, it's like Malphite is like 19 CS and Lucian is like 50 CS. I've seen stuff like that happen, right? So when, you know, Malphite's going to have a little bit more armor now, and his Q is going to give him some mana back, so he can kind of use his Q to get some last hit minions and survive the Lucian poke a little bit better. But what's the trade-off, again, is Malphite Q is going to do less damage to the Lucian, and the Lucian is going to be knocked up for a lower amount of time. So the Malphite kill potential on Lucian is less, and the Lucian kill potential on Malphite is also less. So this makes the game a little bit more healthy in terms of, you know, Lucian's going to solo kill Malphite twice in 10 minutes, and then every time the jungler goes top lane, Lucian just instantly dies. Right, what we're going to say is maybe Lucian only kills the Malphite once, you know, and then maybe Lucian also survives one of the all-ins, because the knockup's only 1 second, and Udyr didn't actually get in range to stun, because the half-second knockup gave Lucian the chance to dash away and flash away. So the bonus armor and the ability to last-hit minions is going to give Malphite a bit of extra gold and make him harder to kill by the Lucian, you know, and because the Q is now based on max health, it's a little bit less damage to Lucian, and the ultimate knockup is less, so Lucian has a better chance to survive. I think, objectively, it's easier for Lucian to survive the Malphite, and it's easier for Malphite to survive the Lucian. You know, now I don't have to play a game where my top laner is 0-5 at 10 minutes, because he's trying to play Malphite against Lucian. You know, now maybe he's 0-2, and the game feels somewhat playable. Okay, so we want to avoid just making the game feel horrible and impossible to win. Okay, because I would rather play 2 really close games as opposed to playing 1 stomp and then getting crushed. And that's true 100% of the time. I don't believe there's anyone on the planet who would rather stomp once and then get crushed once as opposed to playing 2 really close games. So these Malphite changes make it more likely that you're going to see 2 really close games, as opposed to 1 Stomp and 1 Crush, where, you know, if you're playing Malphite against Lucian and you get First Blood, Lucian's pretty much screwed. You know, if you're playing Malphite against Lucian and you get Tower Dove and you have 20 CS in 7 minutes, the Malphite's pretty much done. And he can't, you know, he's basically just running away for the entire game. So we don't, you know, we don't want to make it so that Lucian just has to run away from Malphite for 20 minutes, or Malphite just has to run away from Lucian for 20 minutes. That's super volatile and super toxic. You can make it the entire game really boring for both players. If one guy is just running away, there's nothing happening. Right? If it's closer, it's more fun because there's actually more interactions to where both Lucian and Malphite can actually stay in the lane, and it's not just one guy running away from the other guy all the time. So I think this is objectively good changes. Okay. So what we said here is the Granite Shield bonus is reduced by 2x. Okay, and the change here is that we're getting 10 flat armor. Now, I do the math later. It actually balances out pretty well, you know, if you look at it. And I'll show you that later on. Right, so the Granite Shield bonus in the late game is now 60% plus 50, down from 90%. So if 50 is, you know, so if 30% of your armor is more than 50, you're kind of saying, ooh, is the Granite Shield actually buffed or nerfed? It depends. The answer is it depends on where you are in the game. Okay. So with you know, independent of the Granite Shield armor bonus, if you have 115 armor, the bonus goes up to 44 from 34. It's a bonus of 10. At 250 armor, you know, when you're maxing armor, you know, the bonus goes up from 75 to 125. Here is what is critical. Okay, because this is actually not a buff in the late game. It's a nerf in the late game. Late game Malphite has kind of less survivability than he used to. Here's why. Okay, a 50 armor bonus when you have 250 armor is less than 5% damage reduction. Because each successive point of armor is kind of less efficient than the first. The first armor item you buy is generally the most efficient. By the time you're buying your third armor item, you're kind of losing efficiency, right? So you usually, very rarely do you ever see a pro player build more than 2 armor items, because they just become inefficient at a certain point. They just become inefficient. Okay, so each successive point of, you know, armor scales a little bit like ability haste does. It's actually very similar to the way that ability haste scales, which is that successive points kind of have less percentage damage reduction when compared to the initial purchase of armor, okay? Or gain of armor by level, right? So what we say here is, with rank 1W and 200 armor, okay, the Granite Shield bonus is down by 50 armor. So the Granite Shield bonus is down. So you have less armor now, specifically when Granite Shield is up. Right? So what do you usually do with your Granite Shield armor buff? Well, it scales into your E. So Malphite has less burst. So again, what did we do? We buffed his laning phase by giving him 10 flat armor, but we kind of reduced his ability to just one-shot the carry. So what is so toxic about Malphite? What do you hate about Malphite? Well, I walk into lane and he ults me, ignites me, and one-shots me under tower. Right, he Q'd me once, and then ult ignited and one-shotted me under tower. And I can't do anything against Malphite. What else is toxic about playing Malphite? This Lucian literally just solo killed me at level 2, and he's 50 CS up at 10 minutes. This is just so toxic. I can't play this garbage, right? So that is toxic. One side of the matchup is usually toxic when you're playing Malphite, right? So what we did is we smoothed out the laning phase, but we did several things that reduced the ability for Malphite to just one-shot you. So you kind of made it objectively less toxic for both sides of the matchup. I accidentally showed the next rework. Okay? So here's where we go with the next math, okay? So the Granite Shield bonus is down by 50 armor, but the passive bonus is up by 10 armor, so we're assuming this is rank 1W. Okay, because the Granite Shield bonus lost 30%. Because it went from 2x to 3x. So 3 times the 30% is 90, 2 times the 30% is 60. So you lost 30% bonus armor, specifically and only when your granite shield is up. So I did some math here, and you have a 10% HP shield for where you lost 50 armor. Right? So you're kind of gaining 10%, you're gaining 50 armor for 10% of your max health. Or you're losing 50 armor for 10% of your max health. That's not exactly how it works out, because technically it's, you're getting 10% max health. Technically you have 110% max health, so the 10% is slightly less than, 10, that's just the way I wrote it out. This should be 9 point something, but 10% of your health is gaining 50 armor. Alternatively, 100% of your health is gaining 10 armor, which is what because usually you're probably not maxing W until, like, way later in the game. So for most games, you're only having 1 point W, right? That's what I assume, anyway. So we're kind of assuming this is like a 1 point wonder, right? So we're just doing calculations based on 1 point W, right? So 50 armor for 10% of your max health, or 10 armor for 100% of your max health. So as it turns out, if you use the granite shield twice, you have about the same armor efficiency that you're gaining from having the 10 flat armor buff for 100% of your max health. So the way I did that math is 10% times 50 is equal to 1/2 of 100% times 10. Right? Because 100% is just like times 1. So this is 10. 100% is times 1. 10% is times 0.1. Sorry, what am I saying? Okay, let's see here. Okay, here's what I did. Sorry, I'm explaining this poorly. This 50 armor is 5 times the armor over here. This 100% is 10 times the percentage over here. So this has to be cut in half in order to make these two values equal. Alternatively, this other side needs to be multiplied by 2. Okay. So if Malphite is using Granite Shield 2 or 3 times, in the case where Malphite has 200 armor and 1 point in W, if Granite Shield gets popped 2 or 3 times before Malphite recalls, these changes are a late game nerf. Specifically in the case where Granite Shield is only popped once before Malphite recalls, these changes are objectively a late game buff. And you can, I'll highlight the equation here again. If you don't understand why that is, I apologize for not explaining it better, or I apologize for my math just being wrong, but I'm pretty sure that my math is correct. Okay, pretty sure that my math is correct. Okay, because 100 times 10 is 1,000, and 50 times 10 is 500, so the value on the left is half of the value on the right. So if the value on the left happens twice, it's equal to the value on the right. And the value on the left that's supposed to happen twice is actually the Granite Shield. So if Granite Shield happens twice, it's approximately equal to the 10 flat bonus armor. Okay. If Granite Shield happens 3 times, it's greater than the 50 armor. So what we're seeing on the left is the amount of armor that was lost from Granite Shield. What we're seeing on the right is the amount of armor that was gained by this 10 flat bonus. So if the amount on the left is greater than the amount on the right, it means it's a nerf, because the amount lost is more than the amount gained. So in the situation where Granite Shield gets popped 3 times in a row before Malphite recalls, then this is a late game nerf. Specifically in the situation where Granite Shield only gets cut through one single time, this is objectively a buff to the W. So you can see that in what situation would Malphite Shield getting popped 3 times actually happen? It's in a 1v1 side lane later in the game where you're trying to get control of the minion wave while your team like scraps over the dragon, the Elder Dragon or something. Right? And the guy is going to come in and pop your shield, and then it's going to come back, and then you're going to go to the next minion wave, and he's going to pop your shield again. Right? That's kind of the situation where this is happening. Alternatively, maybe you're scrapping over vision, and your shield gets popped by an Ezreal Q and then comes back, and then it gets popped by an Ezreal Q and then it comes back, and then it gets popped by an Ezreal Q and then it comes back. Specifically in those situations where your shield is getting popped repeatedly, at least 3 times, this is technically a nerf, specifically when you only have 1 point in W and you have at least 200 armor. So most Malphite games, you're not going to get past level 13. Very frequently. The majority of your game is going to be played before level 13. And you're probably going to have at least 200 armor by the time you finish Ninja Tabby and your core tank item. Because Malphite has pretty high base armor, and you're getting, you're probably getting high base armor, and you're getting, 50 flat armor. Maybe you can have armor runes, or armor bonuses from masteries if you get certain mastery trees, give you armor bonuses. You're probably getting it to 200 armor by the time you finish your first 2 items, or at least close. Okay, so there's a decent amount of the game that's going to be played in this general vicinity. Maybe this is a plus or minus 30 armor, but it's kind of close, right? So what we say is, Malphite's getting 10 armor at level 3, that's actually pretty substantial. It's like 200 gold. It's like giving you 200 gold for free, right? So there has to be a trade-off. Okay, the trade-off is that in these poke-type situations, in the situations where I have to be in an extended lane, where my shield is getting popped repeatedly, it's a nerf. But just surviving the lane, it's a buff. So there has to always be a trade-off. Okay, so we buff this part here, and then this part here gets nerfed. Where if shield gets popped repeatedly, it's technically a nerf. Okay, here's another important thing, is that Malphite actually gets really low HP if you try to jungle with him on his first clear. He doesn't stay particularly healthy. And the only way to stay healthy on Malphite is to allow your shield to recharge before you go to the next jungle camp. Okay? And in the early game where you have less total armor, this 30% less armor on the shield is actually less than the 10 flat armor buff. So we can see here that at level 1, the Granite Shield is actually buffed. It's not until you start building armor that the Granite Shield armor bonus becomes nerfed. At level 1, the Granite Shield armor bonus is buffed. Okay, the base armor is just buffed here for Malphite leveling the W. So this gives jungle Malphite survivability, which is something that he very sorely needs. So what we've done is we've made Malphite laning easier, and we've found several ways to make his late game slightly nerfed in exchange to make, what I feel like is a decent trade of power. A decent trade of power. And maybe it's not enough. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe this needs to be, bigger. Maybe this needs to go down to 50%. Maybe the Granite Shield bonus here needs to go to 50%. I don't know. Because instead of going from times 2 to times 3, maybe it needs to go to times 1.5. These are estimates, and I know that it's not perfect, but I kind of did the best I could in the amount of time that I had to write this, which wasn't I didn't spend, I think I spent a couple hours on all this. Maybe less than 2 hours. So I tried to do my best to estimate, and I know that it's not perfect, but there was, there's a lot of stuff here that I wrote, and at a certain point it's like, you know, you don't have to be perfect because I'm not actually programming the champion. I'm just trying to give an idea of what I think, the general range of what I think would be good. So yeah, Jungle Malphite is better. So here's we're going to go to the summary, and it says Malphite is better when getting all in, especially early on in the game, but has worse repeated shield sustain once he builds armor. That's what we said before. Okay, Malphite can also max W if he really needs the bonus armor to survive. Sounds good, right? You're getting rid of the downside, and you're balancing it by removing some upside. The upside of Malphite is that he's actually kind of good against poke champions, because his shield just comes back, and then he can tank another Jace Q. And his shield comes back, and he can tank another Jace Q. And he's not really losing a lot. So we nerfed that aspect of him.
And then we also buffed the early game by giving bonus armor. Okay, and then we nerfed his ability to one-shot the carry, but we buffed his ability to get minions. So we're doing trade-offs that kind of improve the quality of life of Malphite in such a way that it doesn't become overpowered. Okay. So the next is the E. The Malphite E. Okay. Here we go. And I'll just read through it and then explain it later. So the rework, you know, we're gonna cost the mana down by about 10. I think it was 50 to 70 before. We put it 40 to 60. Okay, but we up the cooldown by 2 seconds. So we're kind of saying 10 less mana, but higher cooldown at early levels. I think this is a positive change, because Malphite doesn't have to E very frequently. Having a lower E cooldown doesn't help Malphite that much in the lane. Having the reduced mana cost kind of helps a lot. I don't feel like that if Malphite Q was, having the Malphite Q on a lower cooldown doesn't really help me, because if I use it, I used to run out of mana. Right? So the lower cooldown in the early game doesn't feel that valuable. So also what increasing the E cooldown does is it kind of, okay, so like if E is 7 seconds, it takes you more than 7 seconds to walk from my tower to your tower. So I can probably press E twice in a gank if you're way pushed under my tower. So kind of what this does is this says I get a quality of life mana cost reduction. So I can spam E to clear out minion waves without running out of mana. So maybe I get 2 extra E's before I recall, but I also have to wait longer, so my kill pressure is kind of reduced. Because I probably can't get 2 E's off anymore by the time you get to your tower. So it's kind of like that kind of trade-off, okay? So here's what I said with my tooltips, okay? Oh, I forgot the other part. So here is attacking a large monster reduces the E cooldown by 1 second per attack, up to 3 times per cast. So here's what this, at level 1 E, the Malphite, in Jungle Malphite at level 1 has 1 second cooldown taken off of his E. So remember what we did to Malphite Q? You take, you get objectively more damage to minions. Because blue buff has like, it's like 2000 HP, doesn't it? So this Q is this is gonna do like like 160 damage to the blue buff. It's gonna do almost it's gonna do like 200 damage to blue buff. This Q. It used to do 70. Okay, but okay, the cooldown is up by 2 seconds. But it does double damage against jungle monsters. So the Malphite jungle clear has been buffed here without making the laning phase OP. We've buffed jungle Malphite without buffing his ability to kill you in lane. Right? We buffed his sustain in lane. You know, we buffed his ability to CS safely. We buffed his ability to clear minion waves safely, and we balanced that out by getting rid of some of his upside in other areas. It's a little bit smoother, a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, as opposed to just being this swing or miss champion. It's like watching tennis or watching baseball, right? Like when you're watching tennis, everyone just they hit the ball like probably 90% of the time. When you're watching tennis, they're actually connecting with the tennis ball. In baseball, it's like 10% of the time they actually hit the ball. But when they do hit the ball, it's like it's this big explosion, right? In tennis, they're hitting the ball more frequently, but the relative level of excitement for a tennis player hitting a winner is less than a baseball player hitting a home run, right? So that's kind of, you know, we're making it a little bit more consistently entertaining, right? Where it's like when you're playing football, there's more consistent entertainment. Things are happening more frequently than when you're playing baseball. So we're turning Malphite into being like a football kind of guy, and or you know, as opposed to being like a baseball kind of guy, which is, you know, most people in America prefer NFL football to baseball. So we're gonna make Malphite a little bit more like that, right? So what I said here is, you know, when you're attacking a large monster, you reduce the E cooldown up to 3 seconds. So if I max E first, I have a 4-second E cooldown when I'm jungling. And my Q deals, pretty much double damage to minions of what it used to. So I'm kind of saying that, you know, maybe Malphite can keep up with his jungle clear now. He's much closer to being able to keep up. You know, maybe Malphite can't keep up with Udyr or Rumble, but he can probably keep up with Volibear now. Right? He can probably keep up with a Volibear, or he can probably keep up with a Xin Zhao or something like that. So when we're looking at the laning phase version of the buffs, Malphite is punished for reduced mana costs by having longer cooldowns at early levels. I think this is a good trade-off because the number one problem with Malphite is that he runs out of mana. I've never heard anyone say, well, his E cooldown is too long. Never heard anyone say that. Ever. Right? Because you just run out of mana so quickly. It doesn't, you know, E cooldown short, it doesn't matter most of the time. You're just running out of mana. Right? So we're kind of saying longer cooldown is technically a nerf. Lower mana is technically a buff. But specifically in this situation where you're laning, this is kind of neutral. Kind of neutral, because when I all-in you, I can probably I probably can't E twice before you reach your tower. So this could technically be a nerf to kill pressure. You could look at it as a nerf to kill pressure, because maybe I can't E twice before you reach your tower. Right? Because, you're slowed and then you're knocked up. If I E you, if I get up to E, and then I can slow you, and then auto, and then I ult you, and then autoing and autoing, and then I E you again before you reach your tower. Now there's 2 extra seconds. Maybe I can't do that anymore. So this is kind of like a nerf to kill pressure, but I'm getting a quality of life change because I can spam the ability more frequently. I have less mana that I'm spending. So you kind of are saying improve the quality of life of the Malphite to make the laning phase more livable, but at the same time reduce the kill pressure a bit. Because Malphite at level 6 with a jungler has absurd amounts of kill pressure. And his laning phase is terrible. So why don't we just make him have good kill pressure and an okay laning phase? I like doing it that way, okay? So what I said here is, at level 1, Jungle Malphite has 1 second taken off of his E cooldown. A similar change brought Lee Sin back in the jungle. Right? So I'm basically saying, like, they did this to Lee Sin, and suddenly now he's being played in pro. Do this to Malphite, maybe he's showing up. Because I don't know about you, but people get pretty excited about those Malphite ultimates. Okay, Malphite ultimate is a very exciting thing. And if Malphite can survive lane without being OP, then maybe these super exciting Malphite engages start becoming more common in pro play, and maybe solo queue Malphite doesn't go 0-5 against Lucian, or 5-0 against Heimerdinger or something like that. I don't. It's probably I don't. That's probably a bad example. I don't know that Malphite could kill Heimerdinger that easily, but whatever. You get the point. Q-Max with Sork shoes and Ignite, and you just one-shot people. Maybe it doesn't work in pro, but I've seen Malphites just get super fed doing that. So we get we get buff to Malphite jungle, meaning Malphite is now a flex pick. Because Malphite is a flex pick, he's harder to counter top lane. It's harder to counterpick Malphite because you don't know if it's going to be Malphite in top lane. So let's say I'm picking Malphite and Lee Sin. You don't know if Malphite's top lane or if Lee Sin is top lane. Because Malphite could jungle or Lee Sin could jungle, it can go both ways. Right? Could be going Malphite top, could be Lee Sin going top. Could be going Malphite jungle, could be, going Lee Sin jungle. So it's much easier to pick Malphite now because he can also jungle. This part of it is pretty substantial. Okay. So when maxing E, jungle Malphite gets a 4-second E cooldown. So this is kind of like saying the damage from Malphite E is about the same as Udyr Phoenix stance. It's actually less. It's less, but it's close to the same. So Malphite is if Malphite has a 4-second E cooldown, he's kind of catching up to the Udyr. He's getting close to Udyr clear speed. He's not there. he's not there. He's still slower than Udyr, but he's catching up a little bit. He's catching up a little bit. So here we're going to go into the total summary, the overall summary. Okay, Malphite was bad in lane and could not deal with a split push in just about every matchup at nearly all points in the game. Okay, these changes make Malphite better in virtually all 1v1 situations that occur later in the game. Okay, Malphite can chase people down more consistently and actually trade decently if they turn and fight. This seriously turns Malphite from a champion who always loses tower when he tries to do late game TPs or when he's trying to, control wave in 1v1, to it turns him into a champion who can actually scrap a bit for wave control without just forfeiting the game. Right now the max Q doesn't deal 1/2 of Scion's shield. Because we're doing percent max health damage, right? Okay. Okay, when laning in the early game, Malphite can now farm minions from range without running out of mana and has more armor at the cost of a Q maxing nerf. Okay, I also removed the toxic parts of his kit that don't require much skill. Okay, like the Q-Max AP Ignite builds, that I was talking about, where Malphite builds Magic Pen, maxes Q with AP runes and, maybe Comet, and just Qs you twice and you're half HP. Right? So Malphite's laning was very miss and rarely hit. So that's a play on saying, it was hit and miss. But it wasn't even hit and miss. It was very miss and rarely hit. Okay, so he had a miss and rarely hit laning phase. Despite the fact that his late game is terrible against anyone with just a little bit of HP. Okay, these changes cut from his strengths. And don't get me wrong, when Malphite, his upside is giant. When he's good, he's really good. Okay, but when he's bad, he's really bad. And we don't like that. I don't like that. Okay, I want to say, like, let's have the the upside down and the floor a little bit higher. Okay. So finally, guys, these changes cut from his strengths to cover his weaknesses quite effectively. Right. Finally, Malphite's increased jungle clearing should make him a good flex pick, so it's harder to counterpick him so hard in lane. And then unfortunately I sacked AP Malphite a bit so that I could bring him back into the jungle. To be honest, AP Malphite is one of the most toxic things in the game, so I don't care much. Yeah. So anytime Malphite can just 100 to 0 me from brush, I'm not super happy about that. It's not fun. And I would gladly weaken that part of Malphite's game in exchange for making his laning phase a little bit more livable. For both sides. For both sides. And I say thanks for reading. Yeah, I don't know if there's one. There were a couple things I wanted to change in this paragraph. These changes make Malphite better in 1v1 all-in situations that occur later in the game. Malphite can now chase people. So Malphite can now chase people down more consistently and actually trade decently if his enemy's turn and fight. Okay, this seriously turns Malphite from a champion who always loses tower when he tries a late game TP. You know, who always, I'll just say, this turns Malphite from a champion who always almost always loses control of minion waves. He loses control of his lane to a champion who can scrap for wave control without losing the game. I'm going to say without instantly forfeiting the game. I spelled that wrong. I don't care. Who almost always loses control of his lane to a champion who can sometimes scrap for wave control without instantly forfeiting the game. Okay, now max Q doesn't deal 1/2 of Science Shield. Blah, blah, blah. The best part of this is that I found ways to trade off his power in other places so that these changes were not OP just in terms of the mathematical values involved. Okay. So let's see if there's anything else I want to change. Here's what I forgot to understand, is that I increase the radius. Usually when you increase the radius of a spell, you also reduce the damage. And I don't know if I should also say that is reducing the knock-up time, is that enough to justify increasing the radius? Or do I also have to reduce the damage? You know, I think it's okay. I think it's okay. I actually think it's okay. Because specifically in solo queue, I think it's okay. Because maybe in pro play, this is probably a bit much. Not just that, all of this, it might be a bit of too much of a, because my goal was not necessarily to buff Malphite, just to adjust him to where feels more playable. And you don't just have to go 50 CS down every game when you play him. But in pro play, the half-second knockup, if you're chaining it with a Nautilus Q, the guy might die before he lands regardless. But in solo queue, the odds that your team will follow up on the knockup is much reduced. So having the extra knockup time in solo queue would actually be really valuable because it's more likely that your team is able to chain the CC. Where in pro play, your team can still chain off a 1 second knockup. Right? They can still chain CC off a 1 second knockup. But in solo queue, when you're not communicating, like you're not saying, I'm going to ult, and your team is ready for your ult and they chain the CC right away, in solo queue, you can't do that. So, this half-second reduced knockup might actually In solo queue, I think this change is okay. In pro play, it might need to be somewhere needs to maybe be toned down a bit, but in solo queue, I think this is fine. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? But that's kind of what I think. I think it's okay. So let's get updated draft. And then we're going to upload this video. And then we're going to post the thing.